You deserve the unconditional love and acceptance that we always hold you with and surround you with. To never question that.
I, Julie, am so excited to have you on the Youest podcast. I've been really, really eager to talk to you about your experience, both with the spirit world, with shamanism, with healing. And I'm just so grateful. This is going to be such a rich conversation. I know it already.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
So I think what might be helpful is just to share a little bit about, your background in terms of getting into this work. Was this something you knew when you were little? Like, how did you find yourself, getting into the world of shamanism, natural trance, communicating with spirit? Like, give us a little bit of background so we can better know your beginnings.
Yes, of course. Well, I was always very interested in the spirit world as a child, and I was convinced that everyone had spirit guides, and I was desperate to know who mine were. And it was interesting because I didn't really understand why more people didn't share my curiosity, because I thought everyone should be as interested in that as I was, and yet I found that people's interest varied. And so I think early on I began to be able to pick out the people that I could speak with about my curiosities and about the spirit world and so forth. And so I was fortunate to have those touchstones throughout childhood, including a couple of my family members who didn't necessarily have, I would say, a shamanic framework, nor necessarily a spiritual framework per se. In other words, not a particular path or a particular practice, but rather an openness. And that was really helpful. And I think all that I needed for that curiosity to stay alive inside of me. And then, by way of a series of synchronicities, I was invited by a friend to Hollyhock, which is a beautiful retreat center here in British Columbia, Canada. And I ended up moving there and working there. And it was while living and working at Hollyhock that I became introduced to natural trance states. And I was working at the front desk in the registration office. And I was interested in these workshops that were being offered about shamanism. And one day this woman called and said she was going to come to Hollyhock and wanted to know what I thought about the offerings that summer. And she said, I come every year and I'm thinking about some different possibilities for this year. And she knew more about the workshops than I did, although I was the one supposedly employed at Hollyhock. And by the end of that phone call, she had convinced me which workshop I should go to. And I went to the workshop she recommended. And that was when I learned how to contact helping spirits using natural trance states. And it was just such a profound threshold for me in terms of beginning to form relationships with these helping spirits that I'd sensed and longed to be in connection with, but that I didn't have a means for contacting myself. So that provided me with the means that I was looking for and had been missing.
I am curious. So when you were younger, did you ever see or feel or you said you sensed?
Mhm.
Tell us more. I'd love to hear more about what that looked like when you were younger before, and we'll get into what you got from the workshop. And then, of course, since then,
Yeah.
what piqued your interest about spirits? What was it, would you say?
hmm Well, I think a number of things, and we may talk about this in more depth as our conversation continues, but one of the teachings that's helped me an enormous amount in terms of my learning path as a journeyer and as a teacher when it comes to learning how to perceive in the invisible realms that coexist with our physical realm. And the teaching is that there are subtle pathways of perception, and those are the correlates to our physical senses. And one of those is clairaudience, and that's when you can hear the voices of the helping spirits. And some people will hear them just as we're hearing one another's voices. So it can actually at once be with the physical sense of hearing and or with the subtle sense of hearing. But I would hear the voice of one of my helping spirits in my head. And that's how clairaudience often is for people, that they can hear a voice that only they're hearing. And so, although occasionally the voice feels like it's being perceived by the physical auditory sense as well, oftentimes it's rather a voice only you can hear. And so I had that voice in my head. And as I've joked before, I thought it was the voice of my future husband, lo and behold, but I married a woman, not a man. And it turned out to be the voice of one of my helping spirits. And so it was in learning how to journey and in forming relationships with my helping spirits. This helping spirit I didn't meet right away, but when I did meet him, I recognized his voice and realized
Mm.
that he had been guiding me all along. And so that was one indicator. And then there's another interesting clair, if you will, which is called claircognizance. And so that's when there's a knowing. And oftentimes this is described as receiving a download of guidance or of wisdom or knowing from the spirit world. And with claircognizance, it is often compressed in the sense that it truly does feel like you receive this compressed file of information that you may unpack, that may take a little bit of time to put into words, but it comes in this very condensed way. And I am very claircognizant in terms of how I perceive the helping spirits. And so there were those knowings as well that I had. And I would say that was true as a young person. And then I realized when I learned how to journey and then continued on my own path of study and practice, that there were those pathways that hadn't ever been named or identified, that I hadn't tried to cultivate, but that were there, that existed. And so I could build upon that and continue honing those pathways of perception.
So when you were talking about the spirit world and connecting with your guide, and they're multiple, I'm assuming that we talk a
Hmm.
lot about this here. This is one of the topics I'm most interested in. I know that our listeners are really interested in,
Hmm.
and absolutely, accessing this other
Hmm.
realm that's not visible, whether it's through, like you were saying, the knowing or hearing. For some it's seeing or perceiving. I'm curious, Julie, with this guide, did you end up getting a name or find out more the realm that the spirit guide is from? So we're going to just unpack this as we go, because I'm so curious also to hear. Of course, we're going to talk, for everyone listening, we're going to talk about how you can start to do this and learn how to, because I think we both believe, I mean, this is accessible to everybody. Every
Yes.
human has access.
Oh, yes. I wholeheartedly believe that we all have helping spirits, whether we're aware of them or not. And I would venture whether we believe in them or not, whether we have ever received any evidence of their existence or not, whether we confer with them or not, they're still there and they're available and they want to loan us their support. They want to care for us. They're very invested in our well being and our evolution. And so they're available to us. And the process that I teach using natural trance states to journey into the invisible realms and contact the helping spirits solves the issue of how do we get in touch with them? How do we access their beautiful wisdom and their knowing? And that provides us with a means, a practice for doing so, so we can initiate contact with them. And of course, the helping spirits use a great many means for initiating contact with us through the dream time, through signs and synchronicities, through the knowings that I was describing, through visitations, etc. So many of us have had experiences of sensing or perceiving the presence of helping spirits. And it's quite empowering to learn how to initiate contact and to know you can do that anytime there's a need for that. And so, over the course of now, it's been 25 years since I learned this practice of shamanic journeying. I have cultivated relationships with a number of helping spirits. And the one in particular that I mentioned, he was my father in another lifetime. And
Wow.
so he's been a guide to me. He was actually first identified by a psychic that a family member took me to see when I was 14. And the psychic said he's willing to share his name with you, but he doesn't want you to focus too much on him yet because he knows that you'll get so interested in the spirit world that you won't be as interested in the ordinary world anymore. And that was very astute. And once I had the tools and I had a practice, I met him and, well, really rekindled my relationship with him. But he had been my father in another lifetime, in a lifetime when these practices and when living in harmony with the spirit world was the only way of being. And so he helps me with my vision of restoring that way of being, of helping that become, I would say, normalized again, or even ordinary again. Living
Yeah.
in partnership with and guided by, led by spirit, to me feels like a very natural way of living. And he's an ally for me in that regard.
That's so beautiful, Julie. And this is why we're talking today. This is what we talk about here because I know from the experience I've had and just what I've learned and what I'm hearing from you is, our access to higher realms of guidance that can see, I think of it like a 360-degree mirror ball that can see the
Mhm.
360 degrees. We look forward. That's our eyes are forward. We can't see 360. And when you were speaking, I got this image of this beautiful, who used to be your father, this loving, as you said, helper guide that
Mhm.
sees everything, past, present, future.
Mhm.
And that's the goal is, and so we will definitely talk about the way you teach this. So you went to this workshop, and did you have any profound experiences? I'd love to hear more about, natural trance and how that experience was, what that looks like. Because I can hear questions like, what is that? What does that look like? So take us back there.
Yes, yes. So I was introduced to this practice of using natural trance states in order to journey into the invisible realms and form relationships with the helping spirits, also known as shamanic journeying. And what that means is using singing and dancing and whistling and drumming and rattling, and most especially the sounds of the drumming and rattling and our exposure to that repetitive drumbeat or that repetitive shaking of a rattle does alter the brainwave activity. And so, speaking broadly, the brainwave activity shifts from beta to alpha to theta. And in a theta state, those subtle pathways of perception, I feel naturally open, and we begin to be able to perceive that which lies within the invisible realms. And that means that we're relying less upon our physical senses and focusing less on that which we can perceive with our physical senses, and rather learning how to navigate and perceive in the invisible realms with the support of helping spirits. So, my early experiences were of journeying for the purpose of meeting spirit guides and meeting them very easily and quite immediately, and feeling such a profound sense of homecoming and belonging and connection. And so some of these helping spirits were benevolent ancestors of mine. So from my own family lineage, some of them, like the one I mentioned, whose name is Standing Pine, was my father in another lifetime. Some of my helping spirits are from other spiritual or religious contexts. And so I work with a variety of gods and goddesses within the Egyptian pantheon, and I work with Blessed Virgin Mary and Jesus. And so quite a range, which is very intriguing because they're not necessarily helping spirits that I've been introduced to by way of my experiences as a Western woman. I wasn't raised within a particular religious or spiritual context of any kind. And so I feel these are lineages of learning, lineages of wisdom that I have affinities for or with, as I believe we all do. And I think we belong to a great many more lineages than just our biological lineages. And so as we meet with helping spirits, we begin to discover these other lineages that we have affinities for. and perhaps have had long-standing alliances with in other lifetimes within different times and places. And so it's very intriguing to start to explore the significance of those relationships, which may not be rooted in our current lifetimes necessarily.
Yeah, that's profound, Julie. And as you're speaking, it made me think about, in religion, for some is really grounding, and
Mhm.
sometimes I think about in the spirit world or beyond. It almost feels like it's beyond a religion. It's there's a connection, a oneness. We're all from the same creator. That to me, even as you're naming different guides that might be from a different religious practice or
Mhm.
tradition, I don't know. Have you ever had that, I'm going to say, conversation or interaction or knowing from the helpers, the spirit helpers, about religion, about spirituality, about who they are and who they are for each of us? I'm curious. Say more.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, it's interesting to consider helping spirits through the lens of whether or not they have lived a human life, because not all of them have. And yet they have a great deal to offer us and a great deal of wisdom to share with us. But in the instance of Jesus, let's say, with whom I feel a profound affinity and a deep love, although I didn't discover that through religion, and not in this lifetime anyway, and not in any other lifetime that I'm aware of, although that certainly could have occurred. But for me, that being, that consciousness, includes the facet of the diamond, if you will, that was the living person, Jesus. But to me, the being and the quality of their consciousness transcends and includes that one lifetime. And yet, the understanding that this is the being who was that person at that time provides me with a way of understanding them, of contacting them, of recognizing them. And so the helping spirits will show themselves to us in ways that enable us to recognize them. And I also feel that it's very important to not pigeonhole them, because even if they are recognizable to us, a religious figure such as Jesus, or perhaps a saint or prophet who lived at one time, or Mohammed or Buddha, in other words, religious figures, revered religious figures cross culturally and across different religious contexts, by showing themselves to us in recognizable ways, that does provide us with a point of reference. But we don't want to limit our understanding of them to what we think we know about them, to what we think they are. And so there's a beautiful practice that I was taught early on by one of my teachers, Sandra Ingerman, where we ask the helping spirits to drop their forms. And
Mm,
so to drop whatever those costumes are, if you will, that we recognize and that help us form relationships with them, but that can also limit our understanding of the magnitude of who they are. And in my experience, when I do that with my helping spirits, they also want me to drop my form,
mhm.
and then we are formless light.
Beautiful. Beautiful
Mhm.
what you just said. I think this is important, for everyone listening to really get what you're saying, Julie, which is, in a way, it's taking out the human perception, and it's saying, I am open, I am willing and open-hearted and minded to have spiritual perspective or spiritual vision versus the
Mhm.
vision through our eyes, this vision of, without the form. And I love this reciprocal, you dropping your form. I actually, it's a huge component of, what I feel we're all really looking to learn how to do here in a 3D physical. We have a house we live in called our body. And yet, what you're saying is connecting at the level, I mean, in a way, we're no different than these helping spirits at our higher self, our light bodies, who we really are. In my understanding of what you're saying, that we're the same. And so how beautiful. And I'd love to hear, have you ever felt like I've heard in near-death experiences or even in spiritual transcendent experiences,
Hmm.
that feeling, that sensation of leaving the body. Has that been an experience for you? Have you felt that you've been able to connect at a higher spirit level? Um, we're so curious. Tell us more. Tell us more about your experiences, Julie.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for naming that, Julie, about how there is an understanding that I'm trying to name. And of course, language does fall short. And yet, yes, I wholeheartedly agree that just as there was a person named Jesus at one time, and in connecting with the frequency that is that consciousness, we recognize that it's greater than that one lifetime. Well, I think our beingness is so much vaster than we realize, and the lifetimes that we're currently inhabiting, including these bodies, as you said, are temporary and just one facet of the diamond of who each of us is. And so it's very interesting to begin to experience ourselves as spiritual beings inhabiting these temporary, impermanent human bodies, and to recognize that we're more than what we think we are. And what is it like to not only begin to see ourselves that way, but to begin to see others that way, to begin to see others as beautiful spirits. And so it does very much begin to shift our ways of knowing and understanding ourselves and others. Absolutely. And I would say that the practice that I was taught 25 years ago and that I continue to practice and teach of journeying is best described, I think, by one of the classical ways of talking about it, which is to say that we're in both worlds at once. And so some of our awareness always remains in our physical body. So if I were to journey right here in the room where I am, or from the room where I am, in order to meet with a helping spirit, a familiar helping spirit. So I have familiar places where I go in the invisible realms to meet with specific helping spirits. And so some of my awareness always stays in my body. And that means I'm aware, unfortunately, if the doorbell rings or one of my dogs barks or I can hear, someone honks their horn down the street or whatever, I'm still here. There's still some awareness here, but I'm sending a good portion of my awareness into the invisible realms. And so I'm in both worlds at once. So I'm experiencing the journey through my subtle senses, and my body is physically here at the same time. And yet, I think what's more difficult to put language to is that in the journey, it feels the same way as when I'm here, in the sense that I'm moving in the journey, and that feels like it feels to move here. And I'm talking in the journey, and that feels similar to being here as well. And so it is very much like being in both places at once, with the intention of specifically contacting helping spirits, trusted helping spirits, to receive guidance and or healing, and also to deepen those relationships, because each time we connect with our helping spirits, the relationship deepens and there's more to learn and more to discover.
Beautiful. I am curious. I can imagine this question. It doesn't concern me necessarily, but I would imagine there are people that have asked you,
Mhm.
so you're learning how you're in a natural trance and you're calling in the helping spirits. And I love even that naming. We're calling in helping spirits. And I'm sure you've gotten the question, how do you make sure that you're calling in the helping spirits, and not ones that frankly aren't as helpful? Let's put it that way.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I think the first thing is our intention. That the
Yeah.
intention when we journey is always to meet with benevolent helping spirits
Yes.
and to learn how to recognize them. And oftentimes it's by way of forming relationships with benevolent helping spirits that we then have them vet the other spirits that we encounter, should we encounter other spirits and not know them as well. And yet, I think the underlying question perhaps is, are there benevolent helping spirits and are there malevolent helping spirits? Or is there a different perspective in the work that I do and offer. And I can share my personal view, my personal bias, if you will, or my personal perspective, which is I do feel that everything arises out of goodness. I do feel that everything arises out of benevolence. And I think there is a spectrum when it comes to how well or how accurately or how clearly we have remembered our goodness. And I think that there are a great many reasons that contribute to certainly humans living to start with, a great many reasons why people forget their goodness and forget where they come from and forget their purity and begin to think of themselves in negative ways or begin to be perceived in negative ways. And obviously, there's a wide spectrum there. I would say when it comes to the spirit world, what we often think of, or what maybe colloquially people think of as being malevolent spirits, I feel are helping spirits, or pardon me, are benevolent beings who have forgotten who they are
Mm-hmm.
and don't feel connected to their goodness anymore, don't feel connected to their wholeness, don't feel connected to their purity anymore. And I feel those are beings that need our support and that need compassion. And so there's an emphasis in our work on helping those beings. And so, I don't know how much depth we want to enter into on this topic, but a very simple example of a misconception is that oftentimes at the time of death, people don't cross over successfully. So they don't leave this world as they're naturally meant to, which would enable them to continue on their spiritual journey. And those can become what we label ghosts. So those can be the souls of people who have died, who remain here, and who remain here because they're afraid or because they're lost or because they're confused. So they didn't cross over successfully at the time of their death, perhaps because they didn't know they had died, or perhaps because they died a very tragic or violent or sudden death and are just in a state of shock. Or perhaps they were heavily medicated at the time of death, and so the quality of their consciousness was compromised. Or perhaps their attachments to their living loved ones, or perhaps their fearfulness. People often don't cross over at the time of death because they're terribly afraid of being judged or punished for the ways in which perhaps they have caused harm. And so those beings can become stuck here. They can be in places, you might hear of people talking about finding someone like that in a hotel. There are even tours of hotels where ghosts are thought to dwell or believed to dwell. And for me, those are people who have died who are likely confused and afraid, but whose presence may be frightening, whose presence may be felt as being uncanny or even unsafe. And then that becomes the story about them instead of them being identified as beings who actually need our help. So part of the work that we do in my line of work, if you will, is help those beings cross over successfully and go to the light and be able to continue their evolutionary journey and leave this realm. And my experience has been, even with beings like that who've been labeled as negative, as being negative or as being malevolent, who might be thought to be mischievous or ill-intentioned, my experience has been that without exception, and I first started practicing in this particular way 21 years ago, and without exception, everyone I've ever assisted in crossing over, even if their death long since occurred, decades or centuries ago, without exception, everyone is welcomed with love and compassion and forgiveness. And so I personally don't feel that there are two origination sources, like a benevolent origination source and a malevolent one, although I think it's possible to behave in extremely harmful and hurtful ways. And I think when we do that, if we're living or if we're dead, we are probably ourselves very, very compromised and traumatized and in need of support and help.
I have to say, I have never heard it said exactly in that way, and it is something I wholeheartedly believe as well,
Hmm.
and have imagined. I have not ever had that experience with, to me, the souls they feel like they are lost is the way it feels to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
They're trapped, they're lost, they're confused. I almost think of somebody with like dementia. It's that energy. How beautiful that in the work you're doing, I just saw them, you kind of helping to usher them
yeah,
back to the light. And it just brings back, the idea that the core love is what's here, is the foundation, is everything. I was telling you earlier, I'm very big into the Course in Miracles, and it basically boils everything down. It's either we're all knowing we're love, or there's a cry for love. And even in the spirit world, what I'm sensing, what you're saying, and it resonates 100%, Julie. And I love the way you said this. I feel this 100%. I feel it wholeheartedly, and it can shift our perspective too, what we think of as haunted or scary or eerie, or, we're not our bodies. We are a soul here in this time and space. And these are, I mean, in a way, what came to mind and heart when you were speaking, Julie, is in a way, we're all related. So these are brothers and sisters that
yeah.
are not in body, that need our support and love. And that is amazing what you're doing. I'm curious, have you ever, when you go into trance, or however you connect with these souls, do you see them? Do you hear them, feel them? And what does that look like to help usher them back to the light? I could imagine, but I would love to hear from you, because I just think this is fascinating, and it's such a beautiful way of looking at what can be, frankly, Hollywood has made into.
Ah,
I mean, it's upsetting because it's made it into this, thing that we really fear and then start to believe is the truth. And I love what you're saying. So anyhow, I'll stop.
hmm. Thank you, Julie. Well, yes, of course, Hollywood has, in my opinion, certainly sensationalized,
Yeah.
but also misrepresented and distorted what I'm describing. And I personally can't watch movies like that. They're just so profoundly disturbing to me on so many levels, but most especially because I find it so upsetting that these beings that we would call suffering beings are being portrayed as being intentionally hurtful, when, as you said, so often there is this element of confusion. And I think describing them as being like people with dementia is very, very accurate. And so it's heartbreaking for me when there is, let's say, a ghost in a hotel where tours are running and people are paying. And of course, nobody means any harm. It's just painful for me because I feel that's exploiting someone who's genuinely in pain. But that's also because I believe that there is someone there and that it's not made up. And I understand that when you sense the presence of a disincarnate being, it can be uncomfortable, it can certainly be frightening, but that doesn't mean that they're trying to hurt you or that they're trying to frighten you. They may not even know that you're there. And part of what's so interesting is that sometimes in working with suffering beings, their own awareness is actually very, very narrow at times. And they could be in a home, let's say they're in the home where they died. So perhaps it was their childhood home that they continued living in throughout their adulthood, a family home that's been passed down through generations. And they themselves died there in their elderhood. Well, there could be a whole new family, whether descendants of that person or not, living in the house. But if that elderly person passed away there and didn't realize they were dead, they could just be going about their business in the house as they always have, not even realizing anybody else is there. And yet the people living there could be experiencing seeing them and having different phenomenon, lights turning on and off and so forth, and attribute negative qualities or ill intentions to that being when in fact they just need support in going to the light. And so the process is predicated upon this body of work, if you will, which is called psychopomp work. And the word psychopomp is traced back to ancient Greece, and it means a conductor or conveyor of souls. And so there are helping spirits who are psychopomp allies, who are those specific helping spirits who come for us at the time of our death, and that ideally we would recognize as coming for that purpose, to support us and to conduct or convey us to the light. And sometimes they can include our own benevolent ancestors and so forth. But a person could also be a psychopomp. And so I'm a psychopomp, and many of my students are psychopomps. And that means that we also help conduct or convey suffering beings across the threshold to the light. But a psychopomp can also be someone at the bedside of those in the dying process. So a lot of hospice care workers and people who are drawn to end of life care also have this spiritual gift of being a psychopomp. So they're called not only to assist the person in the dying process with whatever their emotional and physical needs may be, but also in assisting them spiritually at the time of death and ensuring that they have a successful and beautiful passage once their soul has left their body or as their soul is leaving their body. And so with psychopomp work, we can either work with a suffering being who might be, again, in a home or in a hotel or motel or in a particular physical location, but we can also help them if they're attached to a person, because that's part of what is depicted in Hollywood, possession. And possession is real, and it is a very natural state, in my opinion, a very common phenomenon. And yet, it's a very misunderstood one, because once again, these are the same suffering beings who might become attached to a living person because they're afraid or because they're lost or because they're confused or because they think they're trying to help. One of the most common reasons, and I often think of examples of like young parents who might have young children. A young parent passes away at a time when their child is still so desperately in need of parental care. And it's very common for a young parent or someone who has a dependent who relies upon them to have difficulty crossing over at the time of death because they don't want to leave their child or their dependent vulnerable. They don't want to leave them unprotected or uncared for. And so they can stay here and get stuck here and become attached to that child or that dependent out of a desire to protect them, to care for them. So it's a very, very loving reason, but not an ideal state of existence, either for the child or the dependent or for that parent or caregiver, because now they are enmeshed and the person who's died hasn't been able to continue their evolutionary journey. And yet their reasons for being there may be so pure and beautiful. So the work is in large part about getting to understand why that being is here. What purpose do they think they're serving? What needs do they have? Are they afraid? Can we provide comfort? What assurances can we offer them? And asking the helping spirits to provide their love and care and forgiveness and to guide them to the light, to make sure they understand that it's safe and beautiful and that they'll be welcomed and that there will be the possibility for healing and forgiveness in the light.
Wow. Wow, this is really like so deep and so comprehensive and not just, I love these conversations, right? I don't even know, I didn't know we were even going to go here. And it's just, it's powerful because we were talking about, helping spirits and now really looking at the whole variety, the spectrum of what that can look like. And I love this reframing. Um, I am curious, Julie, your thoughts on the idea of our higher self
Mhm,
involved in this.
mhm,
And let's start with that. I guess I did want to ask one quick question about the attached spirit. I just sometimes I'll actually hear questions and I'm hearing somebody say, how would I know if
yeah.
there's an attached spirit? So I'm going to hold the higher self. We're going to put that right to the side. And would you just share what would be some of those, I don't know, symptoms or what would you be noticing or feeling or sensing if there was a spirit that was still with you or attached to you or something like that?
Yes, yes, of course. I certainly understand why some people listening may be wondering that. And there can be a variety of symptoms. Those can be physical, they can be emotional or mental or psychological. So, any different type of symptom potentially. Common symptoms when it comes to there being a suffering being attached to someone is the sense that there's an internal conflict, and I want to go in this direction, but something is pulling me in a different direction. And so I'm hearing a voice or more than one voice that is discouraging me, that is criticizing me, that is compelling me to do something different that doesn't quite feel in alignment with my sense of myself and my inner knowing and my calling. And so, an overshadowing quality or presence is a common symptom. And oftentimes, what people will experience in the example of there having been a death of a known loved one is perhaps what first feels like a lingering sense of their presence,
Mm.
but then that continues to linger. And there isn't any interruption in that. And then that begins to feel as though it could be the beginning of a possession, insofar as that person who has passed away, perhaps not feeling that they can bear to leave the person that, again, is their dependent or that they love so dearly. And possession can happen by degrees. And so some possessions are less entrenched, let's say, than others. And some can start sort of on the outside of the field and then begin to move closer and closer and eventually can occupy the body and the field in a way that can be quite overshadowing. And so, someone who's living, who had someone, a loved one, pass away, let's say that loved one passed away of an illness that had specific symptoms associated with it, they could actually begin to manifest those symptoms if the possession becomes quite entrenched. And people's eye color can change, their affect can change, their way of speaking, the cadence of their voice can change. I mean, there are myriad symptoms. And so unfortunately, some of these are things we can all relate to and that happen normally without there being a possession. And so, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about training practitioners is because I want there to be more reliable, trained spiritual healers out there that we can send listeners to who are concerned that they may have that particular form of what I would say spiritual illness or describe as spiritual illness, so to go to a well-trained practitioner who can diagnose that for you. And sometimes we do need that objective person who's not a part of the system that we belong to, the family system, for example, that we belong to, in order to be able to make that determination. And practitioners consult the helping spirits, and the helping spirits provide that diagnosis. So we rely on the helping spirits to tell us this is, in fact, a disincarnate being, a suffering being who's become attached. And let's help them become decoupled from the person and go to the light. And so that is the remedy, which is called compassionate depossession. And that's a practice I learned many years ago from one of my beloved teachers, Betsy Bergstrom. And that feels important to name because she's trained so many people who share the view that I'm offering here, which is treating those suffering beings with kindness and compassion.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing about that. And I can imagine we're not talking about negative mind chatter or the putting, we all have that at times, right? It's really beyond that, the affect you're and I so interesting to me too, and I love this reliance on the helping spirits. I almost imagine them when you were talking earlier as like bouncers, like they're letting only certain guides or helpers in, but also, and I think of other healers in our past that have, you know, literally in different centuries talked about what you're speaking to, that this is, again, it's putting words to a realm we cannot see with our physical eyes. That doesn't mean it's not there. In fact, it's opening our sensitivities, our ability to perceive and connect, which I know we'll talk about too. That's part of what you do and you train people to do.
Mhm.
Julie, where do you feel our higher self is in all of this? The idea that each of us, maybe I'll let you define. I have a thought about it, but I'd love to hear your definition, higher self, and where does that fit in with our helping spirits, with this process, with sovereignty, with intention, with healing? Like, what do you think
Mhm.
about that?
Yes. Well, I very much appreciate your use of the word sovereignty because that's an enormous emphasis in my work. And part of sovereignty also means addressing should there be a suffering being attached to any of us, addressing that in order to honor their sovereignty and our sovereignty because it compromises their sovereignty and ours when we're enmeshed in that way. For me, it's interesting because, of course, I've heard the term higher self, and yet I myself have never received any training in my unfolding pertaining to the higher self. I work with the true self, and I'd love to share what that means for me, and it may be exactly what you mean when you use the term higher self. So I feel that we each have an ally, a spiritual ally that I call the true self, who is the blueprint for the perfected version of ourselves in this lifetime. And the true self has never been damaged, they've never been traumatized, they've never been diminished, they've never been debilitated, they've never been ill. They haven't experienced the same ways that we can sometimes feel quite knocked about in life. And in forming a relationship with our true self, and in my practice, I experience my true self as I would a helping spirit, insofar as I see her as being outside of me initially. And yet, there's also a practice of merging with my true self, because when I do that, then I come into resonance with that perfected version of who I'm here to be. And that means my medicine as a person, because I feel we each carry singular, unique medicine. And I feel our medicine is a gift from grace that each of us is given to enable us to fulfill our soul's purpose. And so, without that medicine, whatever it is, we can't fulfill our soul's purpose. It's the means by which we can fulfill our soul's purpose. And so, when I meet with my true self, I'm experiencing a version of myself where my medicine is completely intact, where my knowing of who I am and what my purpose is, my understanding of those things is perfectly intact. I haven't forgotten anything. I'm not avoiding anything. There's no part of me that's trying to make myself small or make myself conform. I want to experience my true self because she's unapologetically brilliant, as each of our true selves is. And so she's not egoic, she's not self deprecating, she doesn't diminish herself. And I think those can be struggles that we have on a very human level, at the level of our personalities and egos. And so for me, it's a practice that I engage in and that I teach, of forming a relationship with my true self and merging with her in order to raise my frequency, just as I would merge with a trusted helping spirit to raise my frequency and to come into resonance with their consciousness, which helps me expand beyond my thoughts and my mind and experience something vaster and greater and eternal, I would say. And so that's my experience of my true self. And I wonder, Julie, if that's similar to your experience of your higher self. They may very well be the same thing.
Well, I love this. This is the whole, you just described why I believe this whole show is called the Youest You, because your Youest You is your true self. I'm like, oh my gosh, the true self, your wording is exactly, it like put words exactly. So different. It's great to see that, right? Different labels, same concept.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and really important actually, because when you were describing it just energetically, so I'm going to just share with everyone. You might even want to go back and hear Julie, hear you describe it. I could feel
Mhm.
my energy lift and shift
Mhm.
as you were. We were not even in a natural trance state. I know we don't have drums or rattles, just you talking about the qualities of who we are. That is, for me, that's a natural high and upper. Um,
Mhm.
and something I wholeheartedly believe that is what we're aiming to connect to and to merge with. And so thank you for bringing that in, and just different ways of saying the same thing. Absolutely. Absolutely. With the natural trance and asking you a little bit about it, and I'm not going to get into, I'm not an expert at all in the plant medicines and other ways of journeying. As a really sensitive soul, what I've found, I've experienced shamanic journeying a few times with guided shamans, and I, appreciated the ability to connect in naturally with drums, and I maybe you can talk a little bit about what that looks like, and I'm assuming this is a natural process. Nothing against, there's other ways, and that's just not my experience or my expertise. I'm curious to paint a picture for those, and we'll talk then about, I know you train people to do this, but what does that natural trance state, what does that experience look like, feel like? And is there, do we all call in our helping spirits in different ways? I'm gonna hand that over to you, Julie, because inquiring minds want to know. I'm hearing the question, and I'm also curious myself, like, walk us through that experience, if you can.
Yes, of course. Well, the reason I'm so inspired about natural trance states is because it's so easy to generate a natural trance state. And that becomes, I feel, easier and easier with practice. And so I feel like I've become very entrained to the sounds of the drum and the rattle. And I have my rattle right next to me always. And so I love to check in with my helping spirits and use my rattle, and just shaking my rattle briefly, once or twice, just hearing the sound begins to shift my awareness already. And so what I think people don't realize, and if there's anything to be taken from this conversation, I would say it's to consider the possibility that it's very easy and very accessible. And that, yes, there are different pathways, absolutely. And the only one I know is this one. And so, although as a younger person, before I learned how to journey in 2000, I did, as many of my peers did, I did experiment a little bit recreationally with some mind-altering substances. And interestingly, very early on, my helping spirit said, that isn't a part of your path as a spiritual guide. That won't be the means by which you enter into trance states or that you help others to do so. And so my expertise lies in using drumming, singing, dancing, whistling, and rattling. That's the only way that I've ever worked with the helping spirits. And I can stand in that with such conviction after 25 years of practicing in this way. I also started teaching quite early on. I started teaching in 2003, so I've also been teaching since then. And I feel that there's so much, as you said earlier, just in talking about the true self, you could feel that there was a vibrational shift. There's so much to be gained from practicing in community. And I think that really helps us experience a shift, a collective shift that we can initiate by way of singing and dancing and whistling and drumming and rattling together, and that we can all share. And I feel those trance states become amplified when we work together in community, and that could be 2 people or 6 people or 20 people. And of course, it's also possible by oneself. And yet, I think what can also be very supportive is to work in community with others and experience those very, very expansive altered states together. And then in so doing, be able to validate each other's experiences. There's so many incredible synchronicities that people experience when they journey alongside one another, even if they're not journeying for each other, even if they're journeying on their own behalf. It's amazing the synchronicities that people experience. And so I would love to invite your listeners to consider that it may be easier than they realize. And I can now say that with utter conviction after having taught so many people and practiced for so long myself. It's very, very accessible and it feels so natural. That's why I love the term natural trance states. It feels so natural. And I believe all of our ancestors practiced in this way within different traditions, within the mystical traditions across religions. There are stories of people using different means and practices for entering into altered states in order to receive visions and spontaneous visions and visitations occurring. I mean, these are cross-cultural, universal experiences. And so to me, it's just a part of our human DNA and our human birthright to be in connection to the spirit world. When we're disconnected from that, to me, that's the unnatural state, is being disconnected from spirit. Being connected to spirit to me is the natural state. And I agree there are a variety of means. And this is, of course, my emphasis because it's what I know best.
Mm. Thank you for explaining that. Agreed. And not as an expert as you are, just really believing though and knowing, as a intuitive and somebody that there's all different ways. But this what you're talking about coming through with the natural trance. I love that focus, Julie. To me, this feels it's universal. Why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
This oneness concept that we all, we all have backstage passes. We all do. We all can get to the I just got this image of the person you see in concert and you want to go backstage. We all can be backstage with our favorite helpers, guiding
Yes.
helper guides. I just saw we're all wearing those little you got access. We
The
all have access.
passes.
Yeah, the passes. That's it. That's it. That's so cute. That's so funny. That would be cute. And I wanted to ask, and I don't know because it's on the spot, and this may not be the form to do this as you were rattling the rattle. Sometimes what I'll do is just ask if you might connect in with, if it's standing pine or any of your beautiful helping spirits, might there be a message for our listeners? And again, I'm asking you on the spot, so I don't know by rattle, using your rattle or if it's something you can dial up right now, but I love to ask that because I feel like, there's always a gift from these beautiful helping spirits that maybe want to come through. I feel like I'm supposed to ask you that. So either way, I know we didn't talk about this. I'll just hand it over and it's up to you. And if not,
Oh, of
that's okay.
course.
Okay.
Of course. I would be honored to.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Let's
Okay.
see who wants to come through.
Yay. Oh, everyone, you're in for a treat. Okay, I'm excited too. If you see, we got passes. We all have backstage passes with Julie and her helping guides. You guys, this is so fun. Okay, Julie, I'm going to be quiet now.
Thank you. Well, that's interesting. So, of course, I just checked it briefly. I could rattle for longer, of course, but I think this is what I believe you're asking for and what I gather the listeners need, given the helping spirit I just checked in with. So I asked Isis, who is one of my primary helping spirits, and what she said is that, goodness, I mean, at this point, there are a million podcasts and so many platforms and so many conversations occurring. And thus, we have access to an immense, unfathomable, perhaps, amount of information. And for the viewers and listeners, you're right here. And you've been guided to this particular conversation and to this particular moment. And whether you hear this a week after Julie and I chatted or 10 years after we chatted, what Isis is saying is that your helping spirits have already been trying to make themselves known to you. They've already been giving you signs. They've already been sending you messages to assure you of their presence, to comfort you, to lend you their love and support, and to help you feel that you're not alone, to give you the experience of being held with unconditional love and acceptance. And Isis is saying, what would it be like if you trusted those signs? What would it be like if you decided they're real and they're reliable and I'm going to follow them? Because those are the invitations from Spirit to take the hand of Spirit and to begin to walk with Spirit. And that's why you're here. And that's why you're a part of this conversation.
Give that a moment, everybody, to take that in. That's stunning. Stunning, Julie. I can feel what came through you. And I guess I feel like saying thank you to you and to Isis. Ooh, I can feel this energy. It's powerful. Wow, my heart is pounding. And just really inviting all of us. It made me tear because I personally, since we're having this conversation, I get signs all the time. And I've talked about it here a lot, and really profound, really in the face. I mean, all kinds of signs. And I know this community. I know you listening, you get signs. I know that in different ways. And I love that question. What if you really trusted and knew and believed in those signs and and the beautiful spirit helpers? It's such a, it's like I could just start crying. It's very powerful. It's very powerful what you're saying. We're not alone, and we're loved and guided, and to pay attention, to digest it, to take it in, to savor it and trust it. Thank you. That was absolutely breathtaking. Wow. Well, I got to say, this has been just a powerful and delicious conversation with you. And I know that this is something we're going to have all of your information in the show notes, in the description. But I know you teach this work, and that's important to share also. As someone who has a certification program, I honor that you've put a lot of years and energy and heart and soul and work and time. And so we want to honor, and I want to share with anyone who might be interested that you actually teach this work. And if you want to share for a moment, and we'll have that too for anyone who's like, I want to know more. I will have all those links, Julie, because I want people to be able to find you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, although I'll be a little bit more specific, I've had two beautiful living teachers, Sandra Ingerman and Betsy Bergstrom, and I stand on their shoulders insofar as all that I learned and received from them and all that I've been able to offer because of what I was given. And it's been my inspiration and my guidance, I would say my marching orders from my helping spirits to train practitioners. And I offer a professional training program that takes 3 years to complete, and it has 2 levels. So there's a year-long program, which is the level 1 program, and then a 2-year-long program, which is the level 2 program. And we're in the process of creating certification for the practitioner training. I also train teachers, but the starting point is the practitioner training. And the reason for that is because these modalities, these more esoteric modalities that we practice in partnership with the spirit world, don't have regulatory boards. There aren't necessarily recognized at the state or federal level, or here in Canada, the provincial or federal level, schools for learning these skills. And yet I've been passionate about providing comprehensive training to practitioners so that those who have completed my training are known to be well trained, skilled, gifted practitioners who conduct themselves ethically and who are a credit to the profession. And so we're developing a certification program because we want people to understand that not only are these practitioners very well trained and skilled, but they also abide by an ethical framework. And that feels essential to me in this work, that there is a clear set of ethical guidelines so that you know that when you go to my website and you train with one of my teachers or you receive healing from one of my practitioners, that they are agreeing to uphold a standard of care that would be the same as what you would expect from a psychotherapist, from a psychiatrist, from a medical doctor, etc. And that's simply to elevate this profession, which is still considered to be quite esoteric, although it's incredibly powerful and effective and complementary. My vision is to have certified practitioners practicing alongside certified healers in other modalities, because to me, these modalities are all very complementary. And ideally, we would look through a number of lenses when it comes to how we care for ourselves and our loved ones. And spiritual healing is one, I think, critical lens for us to look through. And so we're establishing a certification program in order to distinguish ourselves as practitioners who are seeking to uplift the standard of care in this work so that we can stand proudly alongside care providers whose services include other modalities and ensure that the standard of care is consistent with everyone.
That's beautiful. No, I love that, Julie. My background being got a master's in health and wellness coaching, intuitive coaching. I've been teaching and doing that for years. And I can see, I might recommend an acupuncturist or, Reiki healer or and to see, I could just, this makes energy medicine, but this to me, I see it all in the same, helping each other and goes hand in hand. And it's beautiful. I love your commitment to integrity and morality. And it's obvious you are living and breathing this work. And just appreciate your generosity of time today and sharing. We will have all the information for people that might be, whether it's interested to work with you or one of your practitioners or the training or any of it, all of it. I do believe in that Rumi quote, what you're seeking is seeking you. So anyone that's if you're feeling like I feel this, well, then check it out, trust and then look for signs. Your helping spirits. This is what I found, at least. You may not even realize it. And it's like, oh, I'm supposed to do this. Okay. So thank you. Thank you. I will just, the last question I call them heart flares. Came through a couple years ago. We called them heart flares where there's just something I didn't ask you or a parting word, a heart flare that is still there for you that you would like to share before we close.
May I rattle again?
Yes, please. We love this. Yes, please do.
Let's see if one of my helping spirits has a heart flare. Just a moment. the message that came from the helping spirits, again, for us and everyone who's listening, this is a very particular message. Helping spirits are saying, you deserve the unconditional love and acceptance that we always hold you with and surround you with. To never question that.
And so it is.
And so it is.
Beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful words to end. And I pray and hope everyone who's tuning in now and at any time in the future, if nothing more, you got that sentence and you take that and seal that in your psyche and your heart. That's absolutely stunning. Julie, thank you. Thank you to all of our helping spirits, your true self. I'm just thanking everyone. We got backstage passes today and it's been a real gift. You're such a light. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for your genuine and wholehearted curiosity. And thank you for your beautiful light, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to say to all of our beloved listeners, wherever you are at any time, may you remember to connect in, to plug in to, as Julie said, your true self, your Youest you, and that is who you are, and that it is always deserving of goodness and of love. Love to you. Mwah. Hey, my friend, it's Julie. I just wanted to share something really exciting with you. I've opened the doors to my new YouTube membership. This is my soul circle, where we will be co-creating this incredible community for like-minded souls, all about tapping into accessing your higher self, your highest potential, your Youest you. And in this group, not only will you have special badges and customized emojis, I'll be giving preferential response to anyone in this membership, to your comments, to your questions, to things that you would like to connect on. We're also going to be meeting and getting to gather and create this community together. Expect live channeled messages and group gatherings where we can connect, and really I can help support you, and we can be together on this journey and path of connecting into your higher wisdom, your intuition, and your Youest you. So if you're interested, just go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Julie Reisler, and make sure you click join to come into my soul circle, my newest YouTube membership. I'd love to have you, and I hope to see you on the inside.